Hi, everybody. You are listening to Judging Meghan with your host, Meghan Judge. I'm going to start out with a few things. If you are not following me on YouTube, my YouTube audience is sadly really not growing very fast, ladies and gentlemen, and other everyone. It is not growing fast enough. I don't know why. Maybe because you listen and then you don't want to like watch it on YouTube. I get it. But if you do want to watch on YouTube, you can follow Judging Meghan podcast on YouTube. I'm also now on Patreon. You can listen to riveting conversations with my husband and I talking about our great love for each other and maybe our great fights. Today, I asked him to go on a walk with me. I said, "This is so nice. Let's go on a walk together. It'll be like a love walk." He was like, "That's the weirdest thing you've ever said in your life." So we'll expand more on like our really interesting conversations being together for all the years we've been together. Also raising two kids, which are not, especially my 12-year-old, it is not an easy situation. I will bring my guest in a minute on that. Lastly, thank you for your reviews on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. I'm now on Pandora, iHeart. It helps new listeners find me. I really appreciate it for my ego as well, because everyone knows you need to have a bigger ego in this world. And speaking of egos, so I am now on day 47 of my sober curious journey, and it's going great. I feel really obnoxious because if I was listening to this while I was still downing my bottle of buttery Chardonnay basically almost every night, I would have been like, "Oh God." But I want to tell you this as a service, like a public service announcement, which also sounds so annoying. I really feel good. I really, really, really do. And what I can tell you is I said this on the episode I recorded that's going to come out next week, but I feel clearer, and I really feel like I am dealing with stuff the way I'm supposed to be dealing with it. I have a therapist on right now, so I might touch on that in a second. But I just wanted to say, without being too preachy and annoying and obnoxious, that for me, I needed this break. I'm not saying I'm never drinking again in my life. I'm taking it day by day, but I feel really good. So I'm going to say that I feel really good. And then the last little thing I was going to say is today I posted something on Instagram. And sometimes when I post things on Instagram, which I love, you can find me at Judging Meghan, by the way, little plug. I feel like I'm sitting here throwing my life out or my opinions out, or even like a picture of myself that I like, or a picture of my family. And then there's like this thing that you're kind of like waiting, like, oh, are people going to say great job? Are people going to say you look pretty? Or whatever they're going to say. And somebody said today on a post that I posted about not drinking, she said something, and it's a listener of mine that I adore. She said something like, "You are fantastic. I just adore you. You're the best." Something like that. And then I thought about it, because when I always like to respond to everybody, and I love getting messages, whatever. But I thought about it and I was like, well, I'm not fantastic. I'm just like everybody else. I'm just trying to do the best I can every day of my life. And I'm not fantastic. In fact, I can be quite the bitch sometimes, like my story that I told a week ago about a woman that should not be wearing a romper. It was not flattering, and I also don't like her. So I said a mean story. And I just want to point that out, that when I post stuff on Instagram, my life is not fabulous 24 hours a day. I am a freaking work in progress 24 hours a day. I could have just posted that post when you said how great I was, and 5 minutes later was like cussing out my husband, or like picking up dog poo, or screaming at my daughter and slamming a door. I am going to bring in my guest right now because I want to know if he number one wants to run and jump off the podcast, so I won't have a guest for the week, and what his thoughts are. We've all been put here for a reason, and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
So, Robert Scholz is a licensed marriage and family therapist. He's a professional clinical counselor. He's a consultant. His resume is not impressive at all. Consultant, so he helps schools and at the university levels on everything from massive traumas and shootings and bullying, you name it. He also deals with prevention and postvention. So I'm going to have him explain that to me. And his company is called The Change Place. Thank you, Robert, so much for coming on. That only took 5 minutes for me to do my spiel this morning. How are you?
Meghan, thank you so much for having me on, and keep talking. And how impressive your journey. Congratulations on that. And it's so cool. You know, we try something different and we never know what's going to happen. So yeah, that's really cool. You're taking that. The curiosity journey, I think is what you call it.
Sober,
Yeah.
curious journey, which I stole from some, I don't know. Everybody's saying, oh, I'm on a sober, curious journey. I don't know if I'm like never going to drink again. I just feel so good that I'm kind of like, why not? You know, I mean, to be honest with you, I my entire adult life, I have leaned on very heavily on alcohol to try and soothe like the trauma of my life and childhood. And anytime there's an occasion, any occasion really, I mean, we as Americans, I think, lean so heavily on drinking, even at like kids' birthday parties, you know, like it seems like it's part of our culture. And I kind of was like always afraid to not be fun Meghan anymore and not to drink and be like party funny Meghan. And what I found during this time is I'm, number one, I'm happier. Number two, I'm still fun. In fact, I think I'm more fun. And I think I'm a better mom and a better wife. So I'll say that.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, and change isn't easy.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm in the business of change. And I think that's why, you know, even the name of my company, The Change Place, you know, that's what it's all about. And I know the change is really hard. And yet, like for me, whether it's working with an individual client or working with a school system or a company, you know, oftentimes people are calling me like when something's happened, you know, something's not going right in either in their personal life or, you know, or there's been an incident in a school and people are upset and they're demanding change. And that's the exciting part of my work is I get to come in and partner and really work with people, sometimes during some really, really challenging times to help them implement things so that things run smoother and better.
Well, let me find out a little bit about you because I've spent a great deal of time being self-absorbed and talking about myself. I would love to know kind of your backstory. I know that you've been in a counselor for, I believe, 25 years. I kind of would like to know where you're from. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, originally I'm from Ohio. I'm from the great Midwest, and have kind of bounced around from Arizona to Connecticut and came to California about almost 20 years ago. And so my wife and I moved here, and she's also in the mental health field. And but my journey in mental health it really began in community mental health and working with kids who were oftentimes referred because they were part of the child protective service system Maybe they had been traumatized or abused. Um, and that was kind of my original entry into it. And then just one day, somebody asked me, "Hey, do you ever want to work with people that have actually been the abusers?" And that set forth a pretty good chunk of my early career. Spent about a decade working with both kids, teenagers, and adults who were kind of on the other side, where like they had been the offender, and they had committed a violent offense against someone else. And a lot of people I always ask, like, how could you do that work?
Mm-hmm.
And I always viewed it as, how can we not do that work? Because, we ultimately, most people who commit a violent offense, they're back out in the world. And so we do need efforts to rehabilitate um, individuals. And it was what I loved about my work with teenagers is, when we could kind of catch them early in that cycle, we really could make a difference. And and so I really spent a good bit of my time doing that work. And then I had a transition where I worked into more in with college students, and that's where my love for prevention work came, because it was at a time when we were really saying, wow, we really need to do something about, like sexual assault on college campuses. And so it was kind of at that wave of time when campuses were really paying a lot more attention to prevention efforts around violence prevention, whether dating violence or other types of violence on a college campus. And yeah, and so my work has kind of been all over the place, from following up after individuals have maybe acted out and caused a lot of trauma in the world. Today, I really kind of walk in all those worlds where I do spend a lot of time, working with systems, trying to help them figure out, how do you get out ahead of things? How do you put your plans in place? How do you really get everybody on the same page about creating a culture of safety? And but then sometimes, things happen, and I'm invited in to kind of help. How do we get this thing under control? We can't. We're too far down the road, but now we need to know how to stop it.
I love what you said about, like, in my opinion, everybody needs a second chance. I mean, I should say not everybody, but the majority of people. And the fact that, if you're a criminal or you do something wrong, yes, I believe that counseling and therapy, like, there's a reason for everything why somebody does something. It could be they were molested, and then a lot of kids in the foster system, especially, have issues. Being an ace myself, or somebody that went through a great deal of trauma as a little girl, this stuff manifests. And so we all should be given the ability or the gift of therapy. Don't get me started on what I think about mental health in this country and how it should be free. In my opinion, we wouldn't have the issues. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but I think it's really important what you.
We have big access issues.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's super important what you have done, and I love it. I love hearing stories about that. And it's almost like, well, if somebody goes to jail and you need a defense attorney, and there's a prosecutor. Well, what if there wasn't a defense attorney? I mean, defense attorneys are always treated like dirt because they're defending a criminal. But how do you know that the criminal's not innocent? You know what I'm saying? So I kind of in my head was thinking,
Totally, right.
yeah. So that's really impressive. Can you, before we go into what I really would love to talk about today, which is, if there's a few subjects, I would love to touch on bullying, which I talked to you before we started.
Sure.
And just the cycle of why people bully. I've done another episode about bullying, but I would love to know what, like some secrets, some things that we can control. I know that I have two little girls, which I told you before we recorded. One is 8, one is 12. I already am hearing from other parents in the class that it's going on in our 3rd grade class. The things I see with my 12-year-old, are very upsetting. She's doing okay. I have her in therapy right now, which I think every kid should be in therapy if they can. So I wanted to know if we could get started there and your thoughts on what I just said.
Yeah. So yeah, we can touch on a couple of different things. So, I guess the first question is like, why? So why do people bully?
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's a complex question. Sometimes, we want to make the jump. Well, it means that all those people were bullied at some point in their life, which is actually not true. That there definitely are a number of people who go on to bully that have that history. And so they were, they're sort of acting out, what's happened to them. What we also see, there's like these other reasons why people, and sometimes it's neglect. Sometimes it's other forms of maltreatment that may not be bullying, but they've been through stuff. Like you mentioned, they have these adverse childhood experiences that sort of leave them deprived and or hurt, or not having kind of healthy ways to interact in the world to get their needs met. So they've grown up in these states of deprivation. And they've kind of had to learn to live in survival mode a lot of their life, which when we're living in survival mode, oftentimes we don't behave in the best of ways because we're just trying to get by. And again, it's that thing of, those individuals, they oftentimes feel really out of control in their life, and they're trying to find ways to get in control. And sometimes they find healthy ways, sometimes it's unhealthy ways. And a lot of that shows up interpersonally, so they're trying to make connections in school, and they don't get their way. Well, they haven't been taught kind of like healthy ways to manage difference and conflict. What they know is they know to, get demanding or get controlling, or in many ways, or get abusive to try to get what they want. And I think there's sort of the subtleties, or the other ways that people kind of come to bullying behavior. And Meghan, I think just a little bit, we've been talking here, I think you would agree with this. I think, kids, a lot of kids are growing up at a time, like raising kids right now is hard, and, coming out of the pandemic and people kind of being locked away, and socialization is really took a huge hit on kids. And parents and families are just kind of like, I don't know about you, but like tired.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're seeing is, like when I see like we both have like 7th graders, we're seeing those kids like they're behind,
Mm-hmm.
like socially, like they're not functioning all the time at that level. And we're seeing that across the board. I think also kind of like in the school settings, what I'm seeing is that schools have just been scrambling to figure out, how do we deliver education? And what fell off, I think, during the pandemic was a lot of the social emotional learning and teaching. And they're just trying to get their footing back about how to manage conflict. And I'm seeing a big uptick when I'm talking to schools and incidents of bullying, of harassment, those kinds of things. And, because again, not that they were ignoring them completely, but I think during the pandemic, there was so many other things that were sort of like how do we keep our kids physically safe?
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the emotional stuff kind of got put to the backseat.
Well, also on the school side and defending the schools and the counselors and whoever else, I mean, it must be constant. And it's kind of like they're doing the best they can, like keeping all the plates up in the air.
Yes.
But, you know, how do you manage um how do you manage like for and this is just my own opinion. I feel like this comes from home. It comes from the parent.
Yes.
So, for example, during COVID, okay, so I'm going to use my own child who hopefully will never listen to this and then hate me in a few years. But I'm not going to go too much into detail. But I will say in COVID, behind screens, right? On iPads, like secretly. Now they're incorporating. We finally caved in and gave our daughter a phone this year. She's in 7th grade because she wanted to feel included like everybody else. Now she's super into TikTok. She's taking selfies 24 hours a day. I know we can't, I know that we need to do a better job as parents. This is a totally separate episode on monitoring her TikTok, and we deleted Snapchat, but my daughter is very smart. But what I'll say is during that period, obviously families that were friends are going to branch out, and then they're going to have their kids in these social settings, like in teeny tiny groups during COVID. And then once everybody goes back to school, there's kids that are left out. There's kids that are different. Our culture now in general, it's okay, which I think is a good thing, to tell children whatever you are, like that's who you are. Whereas kids couldn't be like in 7th, 8th grade and be like, oh, I think I might be gay, right? And during my generation, especially
Right.
at Catholic school. Well, now I think kids have the ability to to know that maybe I shouldn't say different, but they just aren't like everybody else. Um, and that's good. That's a good thing. I think that's a good thing, but they're going to get teased. And then those little cliques and groups that started are going to have to point out the differences in these kids. And who knows what's coming from home. But this is my long winded personal opinion. I've told both my kids every day, I say this to them before they go to school: be kind. I don't care about anything else. I don't care if you're the prettiest. I don't care if you're the most popular. I don't care about anything else, because I don't want a cycle to continue that I went through in my own personal experience. I wasn't always kind, and that's all I try to do now is be kind. So you need to be kind. And I tell mothers that I know in the class of the 3rd grader, I'm like, if my kid's ever mean, you come up to me and you tell me. I don't care if you don't like me. I don't care if like your friend doesn't like me. I need to know. And I hope that's the right thing to do. But I'm just trying to say this all comes from
Totally.
home, because I think there's a ton of
Yep.
parents that put their head in the sand and they just go, well,
I agree.
Susie's in the cool group. So as long as my Susie's in the cool group, I could care less until Susie's not in the cool group.
Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
kind of what I wanted to
And
say on that.
and there's so many things I could follow up on.
Mm-hmm.
Let me talk on the social media part
Yeah.
first. I mean, I think the social media part, and good for you for being a parent who, like, you're trying to draw some limits and boundaries around that. It's hard,
Yeah.
and yet it's really worth it. Um, we as adults don't know how to manage our technology real well. Okay, right? Um, Kids' brains do not have the ability to draw lines and limits, and their brains were never meant to have to manage all that is in front of them today. It's way too much. It's the overstimulation that we see from kids. Then you add in the social element of social media and all the complexity that goes on there, and and it's very overwhelming for kids, and at the same time rewarding. So it's this really interesting balance of, like, I can get really stressed out by being on social media and what's going on in my conversations, but on the other hand, the dopamine is just constantly flowing
Mm-hmm.
from that. And depending on what circles they're sitting in, And, and sometimes, I don't think social media is good or bad, but I think it's where they live and the circles they live in and the kind of people they're interacting with plays a huge role. To your point, like if they're in a really divisive kind of social media setting, yeah, they're on defense. They're constantly being inundated 24/7 with some pretty emotionally laden material. It's a lot for them to manage. Um, and very easily, even if you've got a great kid, but your kid all of a sudden finds themselves in a group of other kids that might be picking on some other kids or making some negative comments. Now they're in that group. Maybe they didn't set out to be in that group, but the power, it's that hiding behind the screen that people get, and the things they will do and say behind the screen that they would never do in person. We see, these kids are practicing bad behavior online. Even kids that may not, they're not bad kids, but they get a little taste of it in the social media world, and then oftentimes that translates, into real life as well.
I
So,
love that you said that. I hate to talk over you, but the pointing out that I mean, I can't control sometimes, like this morning, for example, I wanted to say something about somebody was posting something about Kanye West, which is, I
mhm,
hate to say this, but he's obviously, in my opinion, very sick, but what he's doing is very wrong and it's very upsetting. So I barely had the self control. I started to type something to comment on a post, and then I had to take a step back and go, why am I going to, what is the point of saying this? Like, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm like acting like a troll hidden behind a camera
right.
by commenting, and I'm old and I can barely control myself. So my 12-year-old, who doesn't have a fully functioning brain yet, there's no way, that these kids can control what they're going to do. And like you said, especially with girls, there's the queen bee syndrome, right? You want to be accepted. There's the
Mhm,
queen bee, and then all of the
mhm.
little bees in the hive, they want to be accepted. They learn these weird TikTok dances. Everyone's doing them, so everything you're saying makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think, to your point, so they get into these virtual worlds. They start to say things that they maybe ordinarily wouldn't, but then they get rewarded for it. They get the likes next to the mean comment, and so, oh, well, that feels pretty good, and nothing negative happened. I also think, kind of like what you're addressing too, is, and I hear you. I don't know how many times I start typing something
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, I can't send that. Okay, in response. So you're not alone in that. But we're kind of living in this world of divisiveness right now. And, pick the issue, but, you know, that isn't helping. And I was just talking about that with a group a couple of weeks ago. Man, we're a society of grievances. Like we just pile them up in our heads, and feel pretty entitled about holding on to our grudges and those negative ways we kind of see people, and then kind of feeling like that gives us permission to act out. um, Super super unhealthy, of course. But when we look at things like violence, we know that grievance holding is like a huge proponent, and one of the things that fuels a lot of violence is, if I can kind of feel justified that you've hurt me, um, that gives me permission. I'm not saying it's right, but it can kind of give me permission to act out. And that's, sometimes we do see that. We see that with bullying. We see that with, sometimes a lot, with school shooters.
Mm-hmm.
When you go back and you look at profiles and their histories, almost in every case, they've got a list. They've got people that they were pissed off at. that people who had wronged them, in some of those cases, like some really horrible things happened to those people. But I think on a smaller scale, we sometimes see that in the bullying world, where maybe a kid grows up in a house where they're not taught how to manage emotions. They're not taught that it's okay to talk about issues. They grow up in a house where mom and dad are really quick to kind of be mean to them when they've acted out. So they've picked up that this culture of meanness is one of the ways that, like, it's okay to be that way in the world. So it's multifaceted.
Do you think
Yeah.
that it's getting worse? Like, just I think with the combination of COVID, and then I think, like you said, there's so much like negativity. I don't like to get political on the podcast, but what I will say is, for me personally, I am so tired of the far left and the far right. I just want people to get things done. I want it to be like it was when I was a kid, where people could just talk to each other. People weren't saying
Yeah.
like, you're ugly, you're fat out loud, mean things. Like, it just wasn't accepted. And now it's like, I think that everybody, what you're teaching your kids, if you're on one side or the other, is just
Yes.
really kind of creating this culture of like monsters. And it's not acceptable to be this way. So of course it's like almost saying, if there's bullying in
Yeah.
schools, well, it's okay because we're allowed to have our opinions, because that's what
Yeah.
everyone's doing
Yeah. I
these
mean,
days. Right? So I wonder, is the
well, I mean, I
bullying
think, yeah. I
culture
mean, all you have to
getting
do is,
worse?
you go online and you see the divisiveness that's out there just in general in the overarching world. Um, those the again, and and there's pros and cons, and every generation has its challenges. But I think in terms of the outward nature of the aggressiveness, we're definitely seeing an uptick in that. Maybe 40, 50 years ago, you might have thought some things, but you probably wouldn't have said them most of the time, or you didn't have all the outlets to say them. Whereas now, I think people, like, on one hand, they feel more justified in being able to express things. Um, but that sense of civility, I think we've really lost that. And we're not, like, where are our kids getting those lessons? And I agree with you a lot, Megan. I mean, it's like, parents, if you're listening, like, this is one of our jobs. Like, our job is, like, if your only job is to raise a good human being, like, that's kind, wow, like, you've given a lot to the world. Because they're getting a lot of other messages out there in the world to not be kind, to be
Mm-hmm.
pretty self-centered, whether it's the selfie or the TikTok. And again, I'm not saying that's bad, but there's a lot of self-centeredness. There's a lot of, like about, make it about me, and less focus on, like, how do I get along in the world?
Yeah,
How do I,
like the overconsumption of stuff and money, and you have this, you don't have this. Um I think it doesn't help. I'm speaking personally. We live in Los Angeles, in a beach community with a lot of money. Um I think parents are busy. They're working. They want to give their kids everything. But at the end of the day, I think back to my own life growing up, where we didn't have, we would be like sent outside to play kick the can or ghost in the graveyard. And then if I had a problem at school with a girl that was being mean to me, because I did go through a little brief period of time between like the ages of like fourth to probably like sixth grade, where I was teased. I had buck teeth. My mom gave me a freaking bowl cut. Thanks, Mom. I'm still mad about it. Um, I was chubby, like all those things. And like girls were just mean, but I could, get picked up from carpool, go home, see my older sisters, my brother go out in the court, play kick the can, ghost in the graveyard with all the neighborhood kids, go home, go to bed,
Yeah.
and then
Right.
wake up the next day. I wouldn't have to pick up a phone to see like somebody saying, Meghan, you're chubby or you have a bowl cut. Whereas now that's what kids see, And so I wonder, my next kind of like question to you is how, minus just the parenting, which, you can't go to people's houses and be like, hey, be a better parent. Like, let's get together as a group. But what are some things that people can do to kind of stop bullying in its tracks when they're in seventh, eighth grade and this junior high period, which is so critical in a human being's development?
Yeah. Well, I see it as one of the sort of crucial conversations you have with your kids. I think there's lots of conversations you're going to have, whether it's about sex or drugs, but I think this is one of those other crucial conversations about about how we treat others. It sounds so simple. Like, why should we have to do that? Because I don't think we can just think that they know. Um, and help them understand like what are the what are the limits of like if you have a difference with someone, what's a healthy way to talk about that difference. But just I think if parents would just talk about with their kids bullying behavior in an upfront way, set some expectations for themselves, like and talk with them about, hey, so what if your friend, what would you do if you saw this happening to your friend? What would you say to them? Would you step in? Would you tell someone? Have those conversations with your kids so that they can kind of begin to process what they would do if they were in a situation. And we sometimes we refer to that as bystander intervention, where we teach kids how to what they can do in a situation, but we have to kind of give them a playbook. We can't just assume they're going to know what to do. Just like when they're at a party and somebody offers them a joint or offers them something to drink, we have to talk with our kids about how to manage those situations ahead of time. So I
What do
think if
you
there's a
do? That's a
practical,
separate. I'm still like not prepared for those years. I'm terrified. I mean, I have had my conversations with my kids, but I don't know. I don't think I'm doing a good enough job with things like that. But as far as the bullying thing goes, um, what as a parent, say, okay, let's say there's a kid in the class, and this is not me I'm just saying a scenario, and a mom is having an issue with a kid in the class, and can they call the other parent and say, Cindy is teasing Joey all day? Like, what do you say about things like that? Do the parents get involved? Do they call the school? What do parents do in those situations? Because I do know that's like a situation that I see often or I hear of often.
yeah,
What is your opinion on that?
it's a great question, and I think the answer is it depends. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think if there's an existing relationship with that parent or that family, and it's one of those things where you kind of think there could be some conversation had, yeah, by all means. I mean, I think go to the source when appropriate. um, if you don't know that parent, I think that's a little harder one. And I think going to the school or going to the school counselor is one thing. I think, but I think there's another step in there too. It's about talking with your kid about what they can do. And and I think we as parents, we see our kids hurting and struggling, and we just want to jump in and make the pain go away. And by all means, I mean, I think there's a time and a place where we need to do that, and we need to do that immediately. But then there's maybe those other places where, well, this kid, keeps throwing spitballs at me in class. Let's just use
Mm-hmm.
that like as an example. Really gross and annoying. But I'm going to want to give my kid like, okay, so what did you do when that happened? did you turn around? Did you tell them to stop? Did you ignore it and act like it wasn't happening? Or in that case, maybe empower your kid to go tell the teacher in that situation. Try to teach them to do some advocacy for themselves. A lot of times too, like bullies don't like it. A lot of bullies don't like it when people stand up to them. And I always like when I teach people how to stand up to the bullies in your life, one of the first things we talk about is presence. And we talk about not being as scared as you might be and as anxious as you might be. One of the best things to do is just to be able to turn around and look at them and kind of really look at them in the eye and just say, that's not okay. Like, I need you to stop doing that. That's not cool. And that, again, as adults, that's hard for us to do. It's uncomfortable. As a seventh grader, it's even more uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But we also want to try to empower our kids to have skills and make them feel like they have some agency in standing up for themselves. Now, if it doesn't stop at that point, then yes, now we need to take it to the next level. And that may be a place like, the teacher's been told, maybe the teacher didn't know what to do. Maybe then it's a report to the school at that point. But I think there's some real advantage. I think we want to teach our kids, try to give them some skills, to stand up, to do things if it's safe. But clearly, if they're being put in a dangerous situation and it's been going on for a period of time, that's when we as parents have to step in. And again, sometimes you'll find parents are really like they're appalled that their kids would ever hurt anybody. And when they hear it, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. We will make sure this never happens again. But there are other situations, Meghan, I've seen where complete denial.
Denial and defensiveness.
And defensiveness.
Defensiveness.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I think that I can think of a situation, it didn't happen to me, but I can remember a friend I'm no longer friends with had a parent call her to tell her something about their kid felt bullied or something by another kid. And the parent was like making fun of the parent for calling them and how stupid it was. And P.S. I'm not friends with that person anymore, thank God. But I think it's a maturity thing. It's a like I don't know what it is. It's like a don't like I don't know what it is. Like if my kid, like somebody did actually come up to me to tell me a story about my younger daughter who was involved in something. And she said that something had happened and their daughter asked to play with her little group at recess. And one of the girls said, well, you can't play with us. They're in third grade. And she, the little girl didn't want to go to school the next day. It's a kid that was new to the school this year. So okay. I got in the car and I said to my daughter, my Ella, my younger one, I said, I heard that this is what happened. And what exactly happened, that I need to hear your side of the story. And she said, well, we were playing a game and the little girl came up and we had already been playing a game. She wanted to play and we said, we can't play with you because we've already started this game. And I said to her, that is never okay. You can change the game. You don't tell somebody they can't play with you because you never know how that will affect somebody when they walk away, that they're going to be afraid to come to school the next day because they are brand new at the school. They don't really know anybody and they don't have friends. How would that make you feel? Right?
So sort of that teachable moment. Yeah.
It's a teachable moment. But again, this is something that I consciously work on because I believe it or not, I was bullied as an adult. I went through a horrific friend breakup and had these women just like pounce on me, and it was awful. And so I'm very conscious of teaching my own kids to not be like that because I went through something so horrific. But I think there's a lot of people, like I said, that just do not care and they do not want to put in the work.
Right.
So yeah, it is what it is.
It's that and I think for a lot of parents, it's this, they want to think that they have it all together, and they
Mm-hmm.
want to, the idea that they can acknowledge that they made a mistake or their kid made a mistake is somehow a reflection on them. Look, you know what? Like, we're all trying to figure it out, and our kids are really trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And they're gonna make mistakes, and through the mistakes, that's where they're gonna learn. That's where they're gonna grow. And as parents, like, we've got to be open to the possibility our kid's gonna make mistakes. They're probably going to be mean to someone at some point. And that's where there's an opportunity for us to help our kids grow, to help them develop some empathy, like you were doing with your kid. It's an opportunity to ask that question. How would that have felt? That's an empathy building opportunity right there. And when kids are little, like, that empathy meter isn't fully developed yet.
Yeah.
But our job is to help find ways to enhance that, help people, see when people are deprived or hurting, or in a, like that new kid in school. Yeah, I mean, they're in a tough situation. How do we help them actually do something in the positive way and feel good about that?
Do you think that on the school level, so say number one, it's like what the parents are saying at home and teaching empathy and all of those things. But do you think on the school level, um, that they should be having like breakout groups, like things like where they're taught to hang out with, like, you don't hang out with your group today? Or I think it should be like a bi-weekly, monthly thing where you talk about bullying and have breakout groups. I mean, this is just my own opinion. What are some of the things that can be
Yeah,
done that aren't being done at the school level?
yeah, and I mean, I think, and it really varies school to school.
Mm-hmm.
I think some schools have really embraced, this idea of inclusivity, and really, talking about, not even it from the negative standpoint, like having breakout groups talking about bullying, but talking about, healthy relationships and healthy interactions, and how to manage differences, and how to manage emotions, or manage, when you're asked to do something is wrong. How do you refuse, or redirect that conversation in a different way? I think it's kind of like we know the whole campaign around just say no to drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it doesn't work. Okay. Like, you have to teach kids skills, kind of, to help them learn to make different decisions. It's not just about teaching them to say no. I mean, that might be part of it, but there's more to it than that. We have to help find other behaviors to replace it. Because again, when you look at some bullying behavior on schools, in a weird way, some of the behavior, it's meeting this need for connection, and to be known, and notoriety and power. Okay, we all want those things, right? We all want
Mm-hmm.
to be known. We all want to have that connectedness. We all like to have some power and control in our lives. We just have to teach kids how to get that in a healthy way. And so I think it's education programs around that, but also being really clear and defining what bullying is, and for schools to have very clear, policies and expectations around that. And so sometimes, like when I'm working with schools, the first thing I ask them, I said, "Oh, well, let me take a look at your handbook, your rules," and so I will look in there and say, "Oh, is there a section missing? I didn't see anything on harassment or bullying." "Oh, we just kind of handle it case by case when it comes up."
Mm-hmm.
And that's, for me, that's like a big, yeah, you're just setting yourself up. Like, we want to have community standards that are clear so kids can rise, kids and adults. In the workplace, most workplaces, they will have a policy book. They're required to have laws about harassment and, discrimination and those kinds of things. Schools also need to have a really clear line about those things. And
Well,
oftentimes they don't.
you talk about prevention and postvention. Can you
Yeah.
like kind of talk about, so like if you went into a school and you had to talk to them about like bully prevention and postvention, what does that look like?
hmm Yeah. So the prevention part would be a lot of the things we just talked about.
Mhm.
It would be like have policies, have clarity on what your guidelines are. Also have clarity like on what the response will be. What will be the consequences if you engage in this behavior? Like people need to kind of know what the rules are. But it's not enough just to have it in the school handbook. Like there needs to be a place for kids to talk about that policy or talk about bullying, um, so that it's part of the culture that these are things that the kids see. Oh, they're not afraid to talk about this. They're not afraid to kind of really have us look at this. I think it sends a really important message. So on a prevention side, policies really not being afraid to shy away from the difficult topics. And when things, and then of course, then there's the intervention piece, like where if an issue does come up, you're following your guidelines, you're following your policies. You can't advertise necessarily like what's happened in the situation because of privacy, but word gets around. Like if a kid has really bullied someone and they get suspended, that sends a message to the community. It's like, oh, okay, that's a problem. On the postvention side, it's really, like in a bullying case, I think it is making sure, if there are lessons that need to be learned from that incident, systemically. So are there, are there soft spots like in the school setting where bullying behaviors are more likely to occur? On the playground, in the bathrooms, that where there needs to be, we need to take a look at those things.
Mhm.
Um, Also, making sure, right, that kid is going to get help, that has been hurt. Also, sometimes too, other kids have watched this happen. They've seen a bullying incident occur. They've been affected, wanting to have an opportunity to debrief that if other kids have been affected by that and empowered of what they could do or affirmed if they were people that, turned the kid in. Um, but we also want to make sure too, on the postvention end, we know that a zero tolerance policy on bullying, what I mean by that is that just suspending the bully and sending them home, without any other expectations or ways for them to learn from the incident, is not effective. In fact, now you have a kid who's obviously angry and has some issues. Now you've kicked him out. Now they're home. We don't. Who knows what's going on at home? But it's an opportunity. But we need to make sure some interventions are taking place there. Like the schools requiring they get some counseling. That the families, having to kind of learn about what's happened here, and what they can do to better support their kid, not just punish their kid. So that work is so important because,
Mhm.
and again, when we look at on the more extreme cases, like where we see these situations, like in the aftermath of like a school shooting or some other major violent incident, what's oftentimes happened is these kids who engage in the behavior have oftentimes been very isolated. They have had disciplinary records. They've had problems in school, and when we just kind of push them off onto the edges, they just sit and stew and they're pissed off, and then their minds start to go in not good places. So in a weird way, we need to kind of wrap around in an accountable but also a loving way towards the kid who's acted out.
Well, it's
Because
like
if we
what it's
don't,
like what you said in the beginning, like that everybody deserves to have counseling no matter what side you're on. I mean, this makes
yeah,
sense. I mean, it comes down to
one, yeah,
the saying hurt people, right? Hurt people, heal people, which is one of my
that's
favorite
right.
quotes, by the way. Um, If a
Yeah.
kid is being hurt at home or isolated, or they continue to go to school and be bullied and made fun of, eventually, if they have no outlet besides video games or social media or
Mhm.
seeing constant reminders of violence or whatever it is, it makes sense. I love what you're saying about that plan. If only it could be incorporated on every campus, because I think
Yeah.
it's
Well,
such a smart
yeah.
thing.
And the good news is that some campuses are, and
Yeah.
I see that, and I think we have come a long way. Um, we still have a lot of work to do, though. And
Hmm.
and and I think what I always try to sell to schools is, look, I get it. It takes work to implement this, but boy, it also takes a lot of work if you have something go wrong on your campus. Um, that is going to be a ton more work.
Hmm.
And so, and it's that thing, ounces of a little bit of ounce of prevention really can pay off, and really preparing your campus when stuff is going to go wrong, that you've put that work in on the front end. And again, whether it's a campus, a workplace, like really viewing it as this is a really important issue culture wise. That if people feel safe at work, they feel safe at school, everybody benefits from that. And so I think we have to look at, it's an investment in the well-being of our community overall.
I love it. Are you available to talk to my kids' school? I might contact you after about that and put you in touch.
Absolutely.
But I really do think everything you're saying is really makes so much sense and so smart. As parents, I see the difference between how involved we are as moms with our third grade girls and how it was with my older daughter. It's like night and day. A lot of the moms, are very involved, and they're like, well, what do we need to do to like stop this? Let's get involved. And I do think it starts with the parents, but I love everything that you're saying about ways the schools can get involved. Prevention and postvention is so important. And then incorporating a plan for the school. I mean, it just sounds like it's easy if we put the work in as people, right?
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It's just prioritizing, and it's appreciating that, like, I get it. There's been some other priorities, but I think right now that social emotional well-being, in schools and workplaces and in our families, like this is the time to reprioritize that. We all need a lot of that right now. We all kind of need
We
a
do,
lot of
I
healing.
mean, we do, because I mean the suicide rates in youth have skyrocketed since COVID. Mental health is I think, number one priority that we should have in this country. If we just could help people with their mental health and have programs and things like we're talking about, I just think we wouldn't be in the place that we're in right now. I just think it's so, so, so important. Robert, it was so nice talking to you today. Where are you okay with people following up, reaching out to you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, sure. Well, you can. My website's really simple to remember. It's www.roberttherapy.com, and there's an easy link there to send me a message. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. And I always welcome, parents or whoever, if they have a message, they have a question. I'm one of those people. I'm a therapist who gets back to everybody, even though I'm really busy. Um, I know that people are hurting and looking for answers, and I just feel that it's part of my work is to be available and help, even if I can't help them, to help them get to someone where they can get the help that they need.
I love that. Well, it was an honor to talk to you today. I need to give a shout out to my friend Denise Klein, who I adore, that introduced us. And in closing, everyone, other people happy. And I will tell you that I had a listener reach out to me recently, and I was having the worst day. And she said, well, you've been asking your listeners to reach out to you, and they don't always. So sometimes I'm like, who is this lady in Bulgaria that's listening to me? I cannot tell you how much I love when people reach out to me. And it's you, my listeners, and what I'm doing has healed my broken heart. And I say that all the time, and I truly, truly mean it. You've helped heal my broken heart. So be happy by making other people happy. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you so much for having me.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.